She's barren, worthless. Just throw her out. Those were the last words Maria Fernanda Reyes heard from her husband before the estate gates slammed behind her and her old life turned to ash. They thought she'd vanish into the mountains and never be heard from again. They were wrong. What happened next wasn't just survival, it was reinvention. Banished with nothing but a torn shawl and bleeding feet, Maria disappeared into the unforgiving Sierra del Cobre. But she didn't die. She didn't break. She found something the Valverdes never imagined she had: fire. And when she returned, it wasn't to beg. It was to make them remember the woman they tried to erase. Stay with us, because the ending will leave you breathless and just might change the way you see strength, revenge, and redemption. The woman who vanished into the mountains. She's barren. She's useless. Why are we still feeding her? Those words hit harder than any slap Maria Fernanda Reyes had ever endured. They weren't whispered behind her back. They were shouted loud and clear in front of the household staff just before she was dragged across the marble floor and thrown out through the gates of Finca Valverde like a piece of garbage. Don Lorenzo didn't flinch as the iron gates slammed shut behind her. He didn't even look. He simply turned and lit a cigar, while Maria collapsed onto the dirt road, her hands scraping against gravel, her silk shawl torn at the shoulder, her dignity shattered. She didn't cry. She wanted to, but something inside her refused. At first, she couldn't move. She just sat there shivering from shock, humiliated, her breath shaky in the dry mountain air. A few servants peeked out from behind the garden wall. None came to help. She was no longer Senora Valverde. She was nothing. Maria stood, not because she knew where she was going, not because she had a plan. She just knew she couldn't let them see her crawl. With her head high, blood drying on her palms, she walked. She left behind the estate, the orchards, the horses, the life of cold dinners and colder stares. She followed the gravel path that led into the Sierra del Cobre, a place where most women in silk shoes didn't go. But Maria wasn't most women anymore. She was something else now, something sharp, something wounded, something dangerous. The mountain air cut at her skin. The sun scorched her neck. Her feet, once fitted in Italian leather, bled inside old slippers. By the second night, her lips were cracked. Her stomach twisted in knots. She hadn't eaten since breakfast the day they threw her out. But still she walked, because if she stopped, she'd break. It wasn't hope that kept her moving. It was rage. On the third day, just as the edges of her vision began to blur and the ground tilted beneath her feet, she collapsed beneath a gnarled mesquite tree. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the sky blue, brutal and different. When she opened her eyes again, there were voices. Low, cautious human voices. Shapes moved around her. Hands touched her arms, lifted her, gently cleaned the dried blood from her face. She flinched. "Easy," a voice said. "We're not like them." The man's name was Tomas Aguirre. He had eyes like shadowed glass and a scar that cut across his jaw. With him was his niece Camilla, barely 20, fire in her eyes and a blade always within reach. There was Doña Teresa, an elderly woman with clouded vision, but a mind sharp as a whip, and Lucas, a silent 10-year-old boy who hadn't spoken a word since soldiers torched his village. They lived in the folds of the mountain in makeshift shelters hidden beneath the trees. A forgotten group, some fugitives, some abandoned, all survivors. At first, Maria kept her distance. She didn't speak much. She didn't explain how she got there. But she worked hauling water, picking herbs, stitching ripped shirts with fingers that once held silver spoons. She listened. She watched. And in the quiet, she began to understand that pain wasn't a foreign language here. It was the only one anyone spoke fluently. One night, Thomas brought her a bowl of lentils and an old shawl that looked almost identical to the one she'd worn the night she was cast out. "You don't have to forget," he said, "but you do have to rise." She didn't reply. But that night, she slept without waking in cold sweats. Days passed, then weeks. Maria's hands grew rough. She learned to trap rabbits, to use the wind to predict the weather. She taught Camilla how to read. Lucas began following her everywhere, mimicking her movements like a shadow. Once he even laughed, a sound so unexpected, Doña Teresa wept. And slowly Maria began to change. Her body grew stronger. Her eyes lost the distant fog. She found purpose not in revenge, but in routine, in the dignity of survival. The forest didn't care about her past. It asked only that she endure. Then one morning, it all fell apart. A traveler arrived from the lowlands. He carried supplies and news. His eyes darted nervously when he looked at Maria. "There's word down in the valley," he said. "Don Lorenzo's looking for you. Says you ran off with family heirlooms. Says you're a thief, a liar, dangerous." The clearing fell silent. Maria said nothing. She stared into the fire, the muscles in her jaw tightening. "He's bringing men," the traveler added. "Armed ones. On horseback. Maybe a day out." Camilla cursed. Tomas clenched his fists. Doña Teresa just sat back and closed her eyes. Tomas turned to Maria. "What do you want us to do?" It took her a long moment to answer. She stood, her shawl flapping in the mountain breeze. The flames from the fire reflected in her eyes, not as tears, but as something fiercer. "I want him to see me." The others watched her closely. "I want him to know I didn't die in the mountains. I want him to know what I became without him." Tomas nodded slowly. "Then we'll help you," he said. "But when he comes, it won't be just him you're facing. It's the whole world that wanted you to stay silent." "I know." She smiled for the first time in days, but they forgot something she said. "The mountains don't bury women like me, they sharpen them." The woman who refused to hide the wind changed that night. It swept down from the mountains in sharp, icy gusts, carrying with it the scent of something Maria hadn't felt in weeks' danger. By dawn, she was already dressed, her old shawl, wrapped tight, a small knife tucked beneath her belt. The others stirred around the fire, their breath visible in the cold morning air. No one spoke of it, but they all felt it too. Something was coming. Tomas approached quietly, his voice low. "They're camped near the river," he said. "About 6 men, maybe more. Locals say they've been asking about a woman, fair skin, dark hair. Said she ran off with golden secrets." Maria didn't flinch, and they believed him. Tomas gave a bitter laugh. "People don't need truth when they have power." Lucas stood at the edge of the clearing, holding a slingshot, watching her like she was a soldier and he the young recruit. Camilla paced like a caged animal. "We can move. Take the high path. He'll never find us." But Maria shook her head. "I've been running my whole life. Not anymore." Doña Teresa stirred from her blanket, her milky eyes opening with startling clarity. "If you face him, you can't face him as you were. You'll have to become someone new." "I already did," Maria said quietly. That afternoon they prepared. Camilla laid a trap line along the ravine. Tomas hid a flare in the rocks in case they needed a signal. But Maria did something else, something no one expected. She bathed. She stood waist deep in the freezing stream, scrubbing away weeks of dirt and blood until her skin burned red. Then she braided her hair slow and careful and wrapped it in a red ribbon, the only thing she still had from her childhood. When she returned to camp, even Lucas looked startled. "You look like a ghost," Camilla whispered. "No," Tomas said. "She looks like herself again." Night fell. The stars overhead blinked in silence as the flames crackled low. They didn't light a full fire, just enough to keep the cold away. No one slept. At sunrise, the hooves came. 6 men on horseback, all armed. They dismounted just past the trail, their boots crunching on gravel. One wore a red scarf over his mouth. Another had a scar from ear to chin. But Maria only saw one face. Lorenzo. Don Lorenzo Valverde. Still polished, still smug, dressed in dark wool like he was attending a wedding, not a manhunt. "You've lost weight," he said as he approached. "Mountain life not treating you well." Maria stepped forward slowly. She didn't tremble. She didn't look away. "Why are you here?" she asked. He laughed. "You stole from me. You humiliated me. I'm here to clean up what's mine. I was never yours," she said, her voice flat. "Oh, but that's not what the papers say. See, the land still belongs to me. The house, even your name. You walk into town and ask who Maria Reyes is. They'll point to me." She blinked once slowly. "You really think your name is all I have left?" Lorenzo's expression darkened. Tomas stepped forward. "You're outnumbered." Lorenzo smirked. "We're not here for a fight. We're here for a message." One of the men pulled a folded paper from his coat and threw it at Maria's feet. "A warrant, signed by a crooked judge back in town. She's to be returned," Lorenzo said, "or you all get charged with aiding a fugitive." The silence that followed was thick. Camilla's hand went to her blade. Doña Teresa didn't move. Maria bent, slowly picked up the paper, and then tossed it into the fire. The flames devoured it in seconds. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Lorenzo stepped forward, nostrils flaring. "You think this is over?" Maria didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand, and behind her, from the hills, came a sudden flare of red light. 1, then 2, then 3. From the trees, more people stepped out. Women, men, survivors. Not warriors, but not victims either. They carried no guns, just presence, numbers, truth. Lorenzo's men shifted uneasily. "You see," Maria said, "I may have walked into these mountains alone, but I didn't stay alone. You taught me to expect silence, but I found voices." Lorenzo looked around, jaw tight. "This isn't your world anymore," she added. "You can lie down there, buy judges, burn papers, but up here truth grows roots, and I'm not running anymore." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Tomas moved to stand beside her. Camilla joined her too, then Lucas, then Teresa. One by one they formed a line. Lorenzo said nothing. He mounted his horse and yanked the reins. "This isn't the end," he spat. "No," Maria agreed. "It's the beginning." And with that he rode off, the others following like dust scattering in the morning wind. Maria turned back toward her people, no longer strangers, not just survivors, her family. The woman who built a home from ashes. The wind was different now. It didn't howl or bite. It whispered, warm, gentle, as if even the mountains had exhaled after holding their breath for too long. Lorenzo never returned. Word traveled fast through the valleys that Don Lorenzo Valverde had been driven back by a woman he once discarded like dust from his boots. He lost more than face that day. The papers he forged were exposed by a traveling judge from Zacatecas. Rumors spread through the towns of how he had cheated villagers, bribed officials, broken his own vows. His name, once heavy like iron, began to rust. But Maria wasn't concerned with any of that. Not anymore. She had work to do. The mountains had taught her to listen. Now she used those lessons to build. First came the school, just one room held together with adobe and prayer. Camilla painted the walls with wildflowers. Lucas helped carve benches from pine trunks. Maria taught the children letters, numbers. But more importantly, she taught them how to speak with dignity, even if their voice trembled. Then came the gardens. The same hills that once tried to swallow her, now cradled rows of corn, beans, and lavender. The soil was stubborn, but so was she. People came, widows, orphans, wounded men with old scars and fresh hope, women who carried nothing but grief and a name they were trying to reclaim. They came on foot in silence with nothing but the weight of their past and found something waiting for them. Not charity, not pity, belonging. One afternoon, Maria stood beside Tomas on the ridge looking down at the valley they had cleared together. "It's still wild," he said. She nodded. "That's what makes it beautiful." He looked at her for a long time. "I thought I was the one helping you," he said, voice low. "But I see now you carried us." She smiled, but there was pain behind it. "I didn't carry anyone. I just stopped hiding." There were nights she still woke to echoes of the estate gates slamming, to the sound of Lorenzo's voice in the dark corners of her mind. But now she didn't flinch. She rose. Every morning she would braid her hair with the red ribbon and walk the edges of the ravine, not in fear but in reverence. That was where she was reborn. That was where she decided she wasn't done. One day a letter arrived, handwritten, signed by Lorenzo's youngest sister Isabella. It read, "Maria, I was never brave like you. I watched, I stayed silent. But you lit a match I've been too afraid to strike. Lorenzo's empire is crumbling. The judge who once sealed your fate has resigned. I wish I had stood beside you. I wish I had spoken. But I see now it's not too late to begin." Maria folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box beside her bed. She didn't need an apology. But the truth mattered. Years passed. The village grew. Children who once trembled learned to sing. Lucas spoke his first words in a room filled with people who didn't cry, but clapped. Camilla became a midwife, fierce and calm. Tomas began writing letters to the outside world, petitions for land rights, water access, education. And Maria kept walking. not away, but forward. One spring morning, she stood before a gathering of women, some broken, some mending, all brave. They asked her, "How did you survive him?" She didn't speak right away. She looked out over the valley where smoke rose from kitchens and laughter rolled from classroom doors. And then she said, "I stopped believing his story and started writing my own." That evening, under a canopy of stars, she danced. Not for anyone, not for ceremony, just because her body remembered joy and her spirit no longer flinched at shadows. She was no longer the woman who had been thrown away. She was the woman who built something out of it. A home, a future, a legacy not forged in fear, but in fire. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the interruption, but we hope you will help us improve our content in the future. Did this story move you? Did Maria's journey remind you of your own strength or someone you admire? If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, comment 100 down below. Let us know what country are you watching from. And if this touched your heart, please share this video so others can feel the hope too.